within a small hobbyist community of gyro users, started by GibSmart. There has been a breakthrough close to being resolved, in creating a configuration that would give controller players fast, mouse-like accuracy within first-person shooters, with no aim assist nor months of training required. Back in 2019, GibSmart published a configuration known as Flick Stick. The configuration relies upon a motion sensor called a gyroscope that detects how far the controller is either being tilted or rotated in real life, like a Wii remote with no laser reference needed. Flick Stick is only compatible among modern PlayStation and Nintendo controllers. Anyone with an unmodified Xbox One or Xbox Series X controller unfortunately can't use Flick Stick nor any gyroscopic aim in general, since all of Microsoft's current Xbox controllers don't come with gyroscopic motion sensors by default. But this Flick Stick concept did get enough attention to become an optional configuration for controller users to select in AAA games, like Call of Duty and Fortnite. Granted, you accepted losing your aim assist if you did want to play on Flick Stick on these games. But while the configuration was gaining some notoriety, it didn't become the revolutionary concept a majority of joystick users decided to switch to. It was simply more convenient to stick to the legacy configuration of using your right joystick to look or drag aim. The Flick Stick configuration basically deviated too much from the traditional controller configuration, and you'd probably be better off learning how to play games on a keyboard and mouse once I describe to you, the viewer, how it works. On Flick Stick, gyro is always on. You don't have to press a button to activate motion controls. You use your L1 left bumper trigger to aim down your reticle or iron sight, and your right R1 bumper trigger to fire your gun. The triggers on this configuration are switched primarily to dampen controller drift, or aim jitter. Controller drift is a symptom to where you create small or large unintended movements in-game whenever you press a button, as displayed on screen. Since the gyroscopes within controllers can be very sensitive, although not severe depending on gyro sensitivity and other factors, using your R2 and L2 triggers to aim and fire creates a lot more unintended controller drift compared to just using your short bumper triggers. But aside from triggers being switched, the next change/feature within Flick Stick is using your R2 fire trigger to temporarily turn off/disable gyro motion controls in-game. This feature is useful in certain instances where you want to pull off an accurate shot at a still target with zero controller drift. The gyro off button is also crucially useful if you're desiring to reposition your hands and wrists, since just stretching your hands can negatively impact where your character is looking in-game. The next and final change within Flick Stick that's been a deal breaker for many console players is the right joystick/analog stick being radically changed. Within the Flick Stick configuration, you don't use your right joystick to look up and down anymore. You use gyro motion for that. You also don't use the right analog stick to aim. Tilting your right joystick towards the left will result in your character looking 90 degrees left in a fast sweep motion. Tilting it right will result in your guy looking 90 degrees to the right. If configured right, tapping your right analog stick 4 times to the left or right will result in a complete 360-degree rotation, unless you've extensively used gyro motion to make broad-looking movements. Now you may be telling yourself or me subconsciously, tilting my right analog stick left or right results in 90-degree turns. But what does tilting my right joystick up or down do if I can't vertically look up and down anymore? And the answer to that question would be looking left and right a little bit more precisely, compared to your tilts. Making constant clockward rotations with your right analog stick results in your character spinning right. Making counter-clockward rotations results in your character looking/spinning left. Metaphorically speaking, you will find yourself making small spins, either moving your right joystick up and then right to look right, or up and left to look left, in instances where you don't feel like using your gyro/arm movement to look left or right. And these radical button and joystick changes I've just described to you in detail are perhaps more harder for the average joystick user to teach themselves than learning how to play first-person shooters with joystick settings changed to inverted. Within the year of 2019, there have been only 3 primary ways of using gyro to play first-person shooters on a normal game controller, with 2 gyro configurations being in existence in mobile games long before GibSmart invented Flick Stick. Always on, where gyro/motion aim is always on. Aim, where gyro only activates when you're aiming down sights. And Flick Stick, the configuration GibSmart created. All three of these gyro configurations have failed to be adopted by the masses and competitive pros that play on controller, due to the configuration either not being good or too hard to learn. But with the fourth configuration I created a long time ago called Vita Aim, this changes everything. Unlike always on and flick stick, the motion controls on Vita Aim is intuitive and not a nuisance to always think about. You can decide easily without thought when you want motion controls to be turned on. Like the simplicity of the aim configuration, Vita Aim only builds upon the legacy controls and doesn't replace it like flick stick. Gyro can only be turned on if L2 is being pressed. The aim configuration have been the most easiest control scheme for any average user to get into gyro motion controls, but there's a problem with this configuration that makes it bad. When you press L2 to aim, there's no option to aim without gyro on. There will be instances in which you will want to aim with just your joystick, and other situations where you just want to be scoped in at a target/opponent without worrying too much about moving your hands a little or arm sway in real life, which is where Vita Aim comes into the picture. While the aim configuration forces users to remain in a stiff position in certain instances, Vita Aim has a progressive trigger mechanism that allows controller users to switch fast between gyro on or off without much thought nor second button press required.
And then these are select fire guns using a progressive trigger, meaning that a short pull of the trigger, like this, fires in semi-auto, and a long pull, like this, fires in full auto.
As described in my first ever YouTube video posted on this channel, neutral/no input refers to a state of not pressing down on the L2 trigger at all, meaning you're hip firing in this state. Half press refers to pressing the L2 trigger halfway to aim with just your joysticks. When you press L2 halfway, your character in-game will aim down sight but gyro will be off, which is a useful feature in instances where you just want to aim regularly. And full press refers to pressing down the L2 trigger all the way down, to have motion control/mouse aim basically at your disposal. You can decide during gunfights whether you want to use gyro aim by itself or in conjunction with the right joystick you traditionally use to aim. The next feature Vita Aim has over flick stick and aim is being able to switch between high and medium/low gyro sensitivity. In movement-based first-person shooters like Quake, Titanfall and Black Ops 3, you will have instances where you'll have to solely rely on gyro aim to keep up with targets while aiming. Attempting to use high joystick sensitivity in conjunction with medium gyro sensitivity will not work well. Within these fast-paced games you will also have to increase your right joystick sensitivity too. But there will be crucial moments where if you're tracking a fast-moving target you will have to resort to using high gyro sensitivity, almost completely, and at targets that are small or at a further distance you will find yourself having to switch to low gyro sensitivity to keep an accurate aim at the opponent you're going to shoot. The way you switch between low and high gyro sensitivity is by holding L2 and pressing R3 on your right joystick. It is a readily easy combo to execute where you don't have to move your fingers nor right thumb anywhere, especially if you play claw or use a SCUF controller. Another feature this switch mechanism has is the ability to always start on high gyro sensitivity. Every time you let go of the L2 trigger completely it will default back to high gyro sensitivity, so that you don't have to try to remember whether you left the gyro sensitivity on high or medium last time you used it. Without this weird feature of always switching back to default high gyro sensitivity, you would be dealing with a nuance more difficult than trying to remember whether you last fired your revolver 6 or 4 times. But with these basic concepts of Vita Aim explained to you, it is also important to mention there's a final part missing to the puzzle, in making Vita Aim a viable control scheme. Since I can't find the command nor code to resolve this issue on Joyshock Mapper, nor can I replicate most of my work of this configuration onto other controller mappers like Rawast. So I request the dev and technical staffs in Joyshock Mapper and Rawast to pay close attention and email me over anything they don't understand in this chapter. There will be instances for many players that play on Vita Aim to want to switch between high gyro sensitivity and low/medium gyro sensitivity frequently while holding down the L2 trigger on half press. However, the way I currently have the configuration set up on Joyshock Mapper is to where you have to press the L2 trigger completely down onto full press, and then press R3 to switch between sensitivities. There's no option to switch between sensitivities if you're holding the left L2 trigger halfway down. Pressing R3 on half press will do nothing. The way I want devs within Joyshock Mapper, Rawast and other entities to resolve it is by publishing a configuration of Vita Aim that lets users switch between gyro sensitivity whenever they're also pressing R3 on half press. Since it's annoying to find oneself, instinctively, wanting to switch the gyro sense to medium before pressing the L2 trigger all the way down, due to the fact there will be instances in which a player wouldn't want to deal with high gyro sensitivity, for even a brief millisecond, when pressing L2 on full press to hit a difficult target fast. Another problem that arises when users can't switch between motion sensitivities on half press is when they're following/aiming at a target with just their right joystick. Some of you may be asking, what's the point of wanting to switch between gyro sensitivities when you're not using gyro aim currently? And my response to that question would be adaptability, since within these situations many things are happening. One will find themselves wanting to switch/readjust between high and medium gyro sensitivities multiple times, since the target the user is tracking with their gun sights can tend to fluctuate in terms of speed, in regard to how fast that opponent is moving, and in terms of distance, regarding how far or close the target is coming towards them. Please be sure that when creating this half press switch concept, to have it configured to where if a player stops holding the L2 trigger at full press, for the gyro sensitivity to remain at medium gyro sensitivity, if the gamepad user for example, executed the L2 plus R3 combo once. I don't want the gyro sensitivity to revert back to high gyro sensitivity, until I depress the L2 trigger completely at no press, instead of half press. And with this final issue explained to you, in making Vita Aim as a concept work, any dev team working on a controller mapper or indie game that adds this controller setting onto their product would basically spawn a revolutionary configuration any joystick user can use, with no learning curve. But there are other problems, rather than motion controls, I observe within some games and in controller mappers that need to be sorted out, which is where Project Prometheus comes into the picture. Just as Prometheus gave man fire in the Greek myth, Project Prometheus seeks to give controller users mouse accuracy with the use of gyroscopic motion controls. Joystick users should not be dependent on AAA studios or be stuck playing on restricted hardware like a console, to play in a level playing field with other joystick users. Or in the case of crossplay, be forced to heavily rely on overpowered aim assist to have a chance to compete against keyboard and mouse players in certain titles. Nor should keyboard and mouse players be forced to contend with overpowered aim assist in any games at all. Console players and in general controller users have been coerced for many years into paying a membership to merely play video games online. And if that's not horrible enough, they're also manipulated into buying the newest FPS shooter Overtime, when a good game, that's old, is no longer updated nor secured by the game publisher, resulting in hackers adding cheats and dangerous malware to many servers. Unlike in PC where a modding community can take over a game being neglected, to set up safe and mostly hack-free servers when an old game is no longer supported by the main publisher. This is no longer a request. This Vita Aim config is a wonder weapon that needs to come into existence. This controller scheme is critical towards the advancement of gaming in many aspects I will explain in a later chapter. Whether you're a dev that works for JoyShop Mapper, Joy2Key, Steam, Rawast, or etc., within the time span of 2025 to 2026 this configuration has to come into existence. If you're an influential content creator or figure within the Call of Duty community with a lot of sway, I ask that you proselytize these ideas being discussed in this video if you're not a coder, and to spread awareness to any dev or modding team working on a project to add Vita Aim as a selectable option within game settings. But before I move on to talking about the problems I have with the joysticks, button combos and etc. I have with controller mappers, I'm going to instruct the average user that never used a controller mapper how to install JoyShop Mapper first, how to configure Vita Aim onto JoyShop Mapper second, and later how to install Rawast and how to set up Vita Aim onto Rawast lastly. With JoyShop Mapper you go to this link here, highlighted in the screen and comment section below my YouTube video to install the application. If the link to install the JoyShop Mapper application seems too shady for you, and you believe the app to potentially be malware despite NordVPN's link checker telling you it's safe, you can further verify the credibility of the link I provided to you, since I'm just a small channel you hardly trust, by going over to JibSmart's channel, to his YouTube video called JoyShock Mapper Quick Start Guide, which has around 672 likes and 7 dislikes if you have the Return YouTube Dislike Chrome extension. Go over to this GitHub link here. Click here to get the latest version of JoyShock Mapper, since JibSmart no longer updates JoyShock Mapper but his associate Electronics. And download the latest 3.61 version of JoyShock Mapper. After you have the app downloaded, you go over to your File Explorer here. Click on Downloads, and you should see a zip file. The red arrow is pointing it, to then click and hold your left mouse button to drag it here to your desktop. And after you move the zip file to your desktop, you're going to now hover over the zip file, right-click it with your mouse and select Extract All, where you then press Extract again to properly set up JoyShock Mapper. The second you press Extract, the file will automatically be open to you and you should see another duplicate of the file located on your desktop, meaning you can now delete this zip file the red arrow is pointing at if you want to. When you're within the file, you double left click over to JoyShock Mapper SDL2. You click on the application with the blue icon called JoyShock Mapper. And when you first click on the application, Windows is going to tell you it blocked the application since it's not a mainstream/popular product Microsoft knows anything about, which is fine. It's not saying it detects a virus. To where you're then going to click to More Info. And then press Run Anyway to start the JoyShock Mapper application, which is where you will be done installing the application. But before I teach how to set up anything in JSM, we are going to have to go into our mouse settings and turn off Enhanced Pointer Precision to avoid any complications. Go down into our Windows Search tab, type Mouse Settings. And go down into Additional Mouse Settings. Afterwards, you're going to click on the Pointer Options tab and uncheck the Enhanced Pointer Precision box. After you've finished editing the mouse settings on your PC, I want you to install this free game on your PC from Steam called Operation Harsh Doorstop. Before I give the example on how to set up a controller configuration for this game, onto JSM. Now it is important to know first, that the configuration I'm about to teach you how to set up should be treated like a sample. The joysticks will not be well refined for competitive purposes. And secondly, the full press trigger mechanism to activate gyro will not feel right, in the sense that you don't actually have to press the L2 trigger all the way down, due to the maximum trigger number value Sony set on their controllers, both PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, not being set up correctly as displayed in the screen right now, where the gamepad tester is informing me that the left trigger is being pressed down 100% completely when it's not, because I still have some wiggle room to push the left trigger down further. I advise everyone watching this video to not use this control scheme to play against other players online. This config is meant to give you an impression. Once you're finished setting up this Vita Aim configuration, the joysticks will be usable enough to explore the config within the tutorial/gun training section of the game Operation Harsh Doorstop. Now let's go over how to set up this particular Vita Aim configuration. JoyShock Mapper hardly has a main menu nor user interface, so for simplicity I'm going to refer to the section of the JoyShock Mapper folder where you see the JoyShock Mapper blue icon /application as the main menu, to keep things simple and well organized for me to explain. Now within the main menu I want you to click over the Gyro Configs folder. Then right mouse click to New. Then Folder to create new folder, and I want you to name the folder exactly to myofficial_configs. If you the average viewer doesn't name the folder exactly to myofficial_configs, your PC won't crash, but there will most likely be a malfunction in using my Vita Aim config. After you created the myofficial_configs folder, I want you to click on the empty folder and create a notepad text file within the folder by right-clicking, selecting New, and lastly selecting Text Document. You're going to name this text document as Operation Harsh Doorstop Joystick. And within this text file document you're going to type or copy and paste these text, along with the labels, from the description section of the video. After you got these text within your Operation Harsh Doorstop joystick notepad file, you're going to hit Ctrl+S to save, and you're now going to create the Operation Harsh Doorstop High Gyro Switch 1 text file. Where you will copy and paste this. And lastly, after creating and saving your Operation Harsh Doorstop High Gyro Switch 1 file, you're going to create the third and last notepad file for this game config. You will name Operation Harsh Doorstop Medium Gyro Switch 2. Where you will paste these text. After you have these 3 text/notepad files on your My Official Configs folder, I want you to go back to the main menu within your File Explorer and double-click on JoyShock Mapper to launch the application. Afterwards, when you see JSM appear, as displayed in the red arrow here, go back to the My Official Configs folder and hover over the Operation Harsh Doorstop joystick text file to hold down on the left mouse click to drag it towards the JSM application, where you will release the left mouse button to drop it in. After the text has been dropped on JoyShock Mapper, make sure you're within the application to hit Enter to launch the configuration. Afterwards, you're going to move around your right joystick to see whether your mouse cursor within your desktop is moving. If it's moving, that means the configuration launched properly, meaning you can minimize the running application. If it's not moving, that means you have a problem. Now that you have the first JoyShock Mapper application running on your computer, you're going to double-click on JSM to launch the application a second time. And the reason why 2 JoyShock Mapper applications have to run on your PC at the same time is because JSM won't let me separately edit the gyro sensitivity from the joystick sensitivity. So this is the only solution. After you double pressed on JSM app, I want you to hover over the JSM icon, without clicking anything, on the bottom of your screen to make sure there's only 2 JSM applications running. If you see 2 JSM tabs appear on your screen, that means you are clear to go back to File Explorer / your main menu to go over the My Official Configs folder again to drag the Operation Harsh Doorstop High Gyro Switch 1 notepad text file to your JSM application, in which you will lay your PlayStation 4 or 5 controller flat on a table surface to lastly hit Enter on your keyboard to launch the second part of the controller configuration. After you launched it, click off File Explorer and minimize the JoyShock Mapper tab to test the gyro controls on your config by pressing the L2 button all the way down, to be able to control the mouse cursor on your screen by moving your entire controller like a Wii remote. Now that you have your Vita AIM config, you're going to treat it as a sample. Let's click over the game I told you to install for free called Operation Harsh Doorstop. After you click on the game within your desktop and you're now within the main menu of the game, let's go over to Options, Controls, and press Lean Left toggle. And then press Q to change the leaning mechanic to a toggle, for you to explore the leaning scheme I created for your controller. And switch Lean Right E keyboard button to a toggle. Now that you've edited the leaning, scroll your mouse wheel down towards the weapon section to edit the aim down sights, right mouse click to a non-toggle. Click over to Instant Action. Select Training, Target Range, and click on Start to have a little shooting range to explore the capabilities of Vita Aim and gyro motion controls. You will have an array of weapons to explore and use, along with the option to switch teams and explore the other factions' weapons if you click here on Blue for Forces, with the American flag banner. After you selected a weapon, you will click over this white dot here and press Deploy, where you will spawn in. After you spawned in, you will have two gun ranges to shoot from, the long gun range and the short/close quarter gun range. Within these two gun ranges you will have a TV displaying numbers to you. Landing a body shot at your target will result in the TV adding 5 points to your score. Landing a headshot will result in the TV adding 10 points to your score. For those wondering what the controls are, or what does each button do, I'll have an image of the controller layout displayed to you now. Now that you have a spot to start shooting at random objects, let's go over the basics of Vita Aim again. Hold the L2 trigger halfway down to half press to aim and use only your right joystick to shoot at targets. Now hold down the L2 trigger to full press to activate motion controls / Vita Aim to start shooting and using your entire controller like a Wii remote. If you don't like the way Vita Aim feels because the motion sensitivity feels too high for you, hold down L2 all the way down and press R3 to lower gyro sensitivity. Now if you want to, you can execute the L2 plus R3 combo again to go back to high gyro sensitivity, or let go of the L2 trigger completely and press L2 again to return to default high gyro sensitivity. With the basics already explained to you, spend as much time as you want in this firing range getting a feel of Vita Aim, the controls, and the leaning mechanic, that is kind of buggy unfortunately. Pressing L2 and R1 will result in your character toggle leaning towards the right, pressing L2 and square will result in your guy leaning left. Tell me your impressions within the comment section what you think of the configuration once you tried out both the Joy-Shock Mapper and Rawast version of Vita Aim, after watching this video completely. Now that you tried Vita Aim within Joy-Shock Mapper, if you want you can try Vita Aim on Rawast. This version of Vita Aim is missing the feature where you can execute the L2 plus R3 combo to switch between high and medium gyro sensitivity, meaning you will be stuck to using only medium/low motion control sensitivity with this config, which may give you a good or bad impression. But it comes with a unique feature, if you have the DualSense/PlayStation 5 controller, to where the L2 trigger is set to be stiff at a specific pull, meaning that with this version of Vita Aim, it's significantly easier not to accidentally activate motion controls, nor almost have to build muscle memory to know at which specific trigger pull the L2 button has to be pushed down in order to aim and shoot a half press. Thanks to adaptive triggers and the settings within Rawast, Joy-Shock Mapper does come with this option, but it ceased to stop working after the 3.53 version of Joy-Shock Mapper. But moving on from the subject, the way you install Rawast is pretty simple. Just type Rawast on your search engine and go over to their website. Where you will select the option to download a 1-week free trial of Rawast. After you downloaded the file, you go over to your File Explorer and select the Download tab to double-click on the Rawast installer. And after selecting OK on a few things, the application will begin to install. When installation is complete, you will be forced to restart your PC before you can use Rawast. Where after you restarted your PC, I believe Rawast would be automatically presented to you, meaning you don't have to click over the Rawast shortcut icon on your desktop if I'm correct, where you will click off a couple of things and create an Rawast account. With everything in place, connect your PlayStation controller through a decently long USB cable rather than Bluetooth, since the Rawast controller mapper doesn't work well if the controller is connected wirelessly. Then go to the Preferences/Settings gear icon to your top right of the screen, select Gamepads, and set gyro steering axis to your and gyro initial state set on. Afterwards, you're going to click back and select your search browser, where you will paste and search up this link, added in the comment section and description below the video for you to copy. Once you've entered the Rawast community link, you're going to see the controller config I published, which is where you're going to click on Import Config. And go over to your File Explorer to select the Download tab, where you will see the file you just downloaded. Click on it, select Import, and you will automatically have the configuration. Once you see this screen here, lay your controller on a flat surface, and select Apply to slot 1, where the Vita AIM configuration will be activated. Now when you first pick up the controller, don't freak out. There's this weird quirk to where gyro controls are initially going to be turned on without you pressing the L2 trigger. You're going to feel a stiff buffer zone for your left trigger, but simply just press L2 all the way down to no longer have to deal with gyro always being on. After you resolve that little quirk, make sure that radial menu works by holding down L1, and you should see a wheel of options to select from your right joystick. After you've confirmed the radial menu works, launch the game Operation Harsh Doorstop again so that you can get a feel for this variant Vita AIM, with its unique features I couldn't replicate onto Joy-Shock Mapper. Now that you're within the game's starting menu, go over to Options, Gameplay, and set Global Mouse Sensitivity to 4. Then go over to Select Video and change Display Mode to windowed full screen so that you may have access/a view of the radial menu. After you finish changing your settings, go over to Instant Action, Training, and the target range again, where you can try out this version of Vita AIM. Before I start mentioning some of the issues and proposed solutions, there will be timestamps highlighted in blue for Joy-Shock Mapper devs to primarily watch, timestamps in yellow for Rawast devs to watch, timestamps in blue and yellow for both JSM Rawast and other controller mapper devs to watch, timestamps in black for game and modding devs to watch, and timestamps in white for all audience members, both casual viewers and devs, to watch. In some PC games like Black Ops 3 for example, you can technically pair in-game controls with the controls from a controller mapper. Like in this example here, where I set the up D-pad button to switch to weapons if I hold it for a long enough time. But when I try to use Vita AIM motion controls in conjunction with the game's controller settings, there are issues that arise. first one being the right joystick being cancelled out with the mouse movement command to also look, resulting in a clunky mess in which Vita aim can't be paired with the game's refined joystick settings. A second issue that comes up with using in-game controls with a controller mapper is your guy meleeing every time you perform the L2 plus R3 combo to switch between high and medium gyro sensitivities, which can result in precious seconds being lost in being the first person to shoot in a gunfight, because your character meleeed. With the third issue being a game like Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered, not allowing you to use a mouse and keyboard at all to play, if the game detects a controller connected. The only thing a controller user playing Modern Warfare Remastered can do with a keyboard is just type messages in game chat. In the off chance that joystick controls within a mapper can't be refined, in Project Prometheus, to the same quality many in-game joystick controls are in mainstream games, modders should seek to add Vita aim into many of these old titles. And for game developers to remove the weird cancellation commands whenever someone hypothetically uses the right joystick and mouse at the same time to aim. Have it to where aim assist is disabled if someone using a joystick and mouse to aim concerns you. Another feature game developers should add in their products, so that the game is more friendly to controller mapper users, is to give consumers the option to disable/unmap in-game buttons and controls. A great example of this map and unmap concept comes from an old 2005 game called Star Wars Battlefront 2, the original. Within the game's settings I can assign the circle button on my PlayStation controller to be the crouch button in-game. But I can also unassign this button and go onto a controller mapper like Joy-Shock Mapper, to add a special feature that I never could within the game's settings, to where if I press circle one time my guy will crouch, but my guy will perform a roll if I double tap on circle twice. This unmap concept would be useful in resolving the melee issue when performing the L2 plus R3 combo to switch gyro sensitivities, if more PC games had it. Another unique advantage that would come from unmapping in-game controls is the feature to retain the option to walk when pushing the left joystick. Although Rwast already has a workaround to this issue, too complicated to explain in this video. That involves connecting a second controller. This would be another plus in game developers adding the feature. Now that I got through with one of the basic issues in using a controller mapper, let's go over the complex issues and facts controller mappers have in configuring the right joystick most console/controller players use to look and aim. Because you see the quality controls of using a right analog stick to look and aim through a controller mapper never feels quite the same, to the same degree as using joystick controls console games provide by default. To start, I already know the basics between a linear response curve and a standard response curve, with the standard response curve being the default response curve all modern games automatically provide to the console/controller player, if the controller user never messes nor changes anything within the game's control settings. The configuration samples I gave and instructed you to download and set up within Joy-Shock Mapper and Rwast are in linear, but you can change the joystick settings in JSM to no longer be linear by inserting this command. While in Rwast, clicking over to here, selecting Advanced, and selecting Response, you can change the setting from default to Custom, where you will click over the tool icon, where a graph sheet with numbers will be presented to you. Within this graph sheet you, if you want, will change the numbers to match to this as displayed on screen, and be sure to start changing the numbers from point 1 first to point 4 in order, to avoid any complications. After you finished editing the graph sheet, you're going to hover over the graph chart, right-click on it, and select Copy Curve Settings. After you copy the curve settings, you're going to click over to Back. Click on Main Layer. Select Shift Layer 1. Click over to where the red arrow is pointing at. Select Advanced. Click over to Default and change it to Custom. Right-click on the graph chart, and select Paste Curve Settings. When you copied and pasted the standard response curve, you can then hit Save again. Editing and changing the joystick response curve to be in standard instead of linear significantly improves the usability of the right joystick to aim and hip fire, but it doesn't automatically refine the joystick controls. You also have dead zone to take into account. Games like Battlefield 4 and others don't have good dead zones, but there's a game I occasionally like to play on my PlayStation called Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered. I like the way the joystick controls handle in this game, which is why I replicated/copied the game's dead zone setting. I researched and conducted an experiment, too tedious to explain, to where I first opened and changed the graphic settings within this Call of Duty game, on PC, to windowed. Then after editing the display, I went over to my search browser, where I used this website called hardwaretester.com to see the joystick values in real time. And after I had both the game and hardware tester browser displayed at the same time, I set my controller down against a heavy wallet to then use a rubber band and marker to comfortably pull the right joystick to its most minimal value in-game. To discover the dead zone is set within the 0.06667 joystick deflection mark. Meaning the joystick dead zone in Modern Warfare Remastered is set between 6% to 7%. Now in JoyShock Mapper, it's pretty simple to set the dead zone to 7% joystick deflection by copying and pasting this command. But in Rawast I had to look into the application to find the number that represents the maximum joystick deflection, which is 32,768. To where I then performed the basic percentage formula to see what 6% or 6.6% number value would be, which is 2,162.6, to where I then set the X number to 2,162 within the 0.1 tab. And the low tab within the precise adjustment section highlighted where the red arrow is pointing at. But while the dead zone may have been edited and improved drastically, it still doesn't mimic the same joystick feel Modern Warfare Remastered has. There's also something misleading within a lot of games that support controllers, including COD Modern Warfare Remastered. If I go to my controller settings within MWR, you will see that both my horizontal and vertical joystick sensitivity is set to the same number, 4. But after closely inspecting the way both horizontal and vertical joystick sensitivities control, they're not the same. If anything, the horizontal sensitivity is set to 4, while the vertical sensitivity is set to 3, regardless of how you set up the joystick controls. But you're probably wondering how I discovered this discrepancy. And the answer is a bit technical to explain. I first wanted to find out how long it would take for my character in-game to complete a full rotation, horizontally, at max joystick deflection/pull. which is when I performed another recording experiment, where I had to pull the right joystick towards the right direction at full throttle. I had to make a bullet hole and center that hole within my hipfire crosshairs first, then have both the game tab and hardware tester displayed within my screen. Pull and maintain the right joystick to full deflection towards the right, and use my other hand, that isn't keeping the joystick at full deflection, to switch tabs or move the mouse cursor over to the game tab to click on it. And after preforming and recording these rotations at 30 frames per second, I found out that the average times it takes for a full rotation to be completed at 4 joystick sensitivity within COD MWR were 1.04 seconds to 1.05 seconds in Adobe Premiere. After I found the general rotational speed value of Modern Warfare Remastered, I had to conduct a couple recordings and test within another game with Rawast to find the perfect sensitivity number within the controller mapper that matches to the rotational speed value of COD MWR, and after I found it, I set the vertical sensitivity to the same number as the horizontal sense, only to later on find out that the joystick's controls still don't handle the same as the controls found in COD MWR, which is where I performed another recording experiment, to where I had 2 tabs open, and pressed against my right joystick vertically completely before clicking over the game tab. To find out after performing the recording experiment 3 times, that the average time it took for my character to look completely up was this. After finding the vertical timing of COD MWR, I found that the time it took for my person in COD Black Ops 1 to look up fully was completely different. The time was shorter, meaning the vertical sensitivity had to be lower than the horizontal sensitivity, which is where I found out after multiple recordings and attempts that if I lowered the vertical sensitivity from 50 to 19, the vertical timing speed finally coincides with the timings of COD MWR, which is where I have to conclude that the vertical joystick sensitivity in COD Modern Warfare Remastered has been reduced to 38% of the speed the horizontal sensitivity has. But while the responsive curve, dead zone, and vertical sensitivity may be refined and edited, there doesn't exist any way of matching the joystick controls of COD MWR into any controller mapper in existence currently. Due to an overlooked phenomenon, I haven't seen any YouTube video nor blog post online mention. First, the way joystick controls function when you're within the hip-fire stance compared to when you're aiming differ entirely than just your joystick sensitivity being reduced. You see, the way the joystick standard response curve looks on MWR when you're in the hip-fire stance doesn't look like this, it looks like this. Within the 95% joystick deflection mark, the line deviates instantly from a standard to linear line. This feature within COD MWR and many other first-person shooter games gives the player the ability to look at different directions a little more faster when the joystick user is basically pushing their joystick at max deflection. And this was a noticeable problem I encountered when matching the max horizontal joystick sensitivity onto my controller mapper when I first started measuring the rotation and speed of specific joystick configurations on Adobe Premiere. The joystick sensitivity would always feel too high for me to use, yet I would exactly match the max sensitivity in MWR to my controller mapper. And this unique feature is in many first-person shooters on console or PC games that provide controller support, but there's no way to replicate this feature onto any of today's current controller mappers that I know of. On JoyShock mapper there's no command to make the response curve look like this, while on the Rawast controller mapper they only give you 4 /points to work with, not enough to make the response curve look like this on Rawast. Which is why I suggest the dev team at Rawast to update their application, to where the consumer/user of Rawast can add more dots to make their personalized response curve look like this. And for JSM devs to add a new command for users that play on right stick mode aim. A sixth problem I encountered, to replicating COD MWR's joystick controls onto a controller mapper, has something to do with the subject of either angle-based weighting, separate internal axis multipliers, or dead zone padding. I don't know exactly what's causing this other phenomenon, but let me explain the issue in detail. As displayed in this recording, in COD MWR if I push the joystick, I used to look right at 33% deflection in axis 2, and upward at 27% deflection in axis 3. The time it takes for my character to look all the way up are as follows. While the timing it takes for this experimental config I made to look completely up are different. Now you may have a lot of questions as to whether the joystick mapping / response curve I made in this chart is even accurate. And to summarize the answer, I'll explain first that the joystick / response curve edit I created here control almost exactly the same as COD MWR's joystick handling. I've done the basic calculations and tedious job of recording and spinning my character horizontally and etc. to find the accurate y-axis number I should set the sensitivity to when I push the right joystick at 25% deflection, 50% deflection, and 75% deflection. RWASD doesn't give me many options due to the fact that I only have 4 dots to work with here. But I hope you can understand the point that I'm making, that this joystick setup I created is accurate up to a certain point. But to go back to the main issue here, I don't know what's causing these differences in timing, in both my JoyShock mapper and RWASD mappers, but I believe a lot of developers that work on controller mappers should look into this phenomenon, and add a feature to where something happens when a user pulls their right joystick vertically and horizontally at the same time, to closely mimic joystick controls found in many modern console shooters. 7th issue I have to mention is in regard to JoyShock mapper, more specifically the graphic stutter. When I use my right joystick to look and aim, I don't notice this problem on RWASD, but on JSM if you spin in circles you will see the stutter I'm talking about, while on RWASD you won't. On Call of Duty Black Ops 1, the stutter becomes too much for me to bear, that I can hardly play the game without being bothered, which is why I request the JoyShock mapper devs to fix this, for users that play on right stick mode aim instead of flick stick. And the 8th thing I want to mention is an interesting observation I want to point out to any controller mapper developers, whether it be JSM, RWASD or etc. Going back to the subject of dead zone I discovered on RWASD. First, the mouse cursor within my desktop will not move if I set the y-axis joystick sensitivity, in this manner, to 1 within my response curve graph. But the mouse cursor will start to noticeably move when I set the y-axis number to 6. With this train of thought, I believe that if I set the y-axis joystick sensitivity initially to 6, when I push / deflect my joystick within the 6% dead zone mark, which is this number, 2162, that I would have a good dead zone set up. But after thorough research I discovered that for a config on a controller mapper to have good joystick controls in making very small incremental movements, to aim, the in-game mouse sensitivity has to be set to a very small number, within the 1 to 4 range in-game settings. So to summarize the point, good controller configurations, running from a controller mapper, have to be paired with very low mouse sensitivity, so that the joystick handling can be to the same quality / standard as modern first-person shooters on console or PC with controller support. Which is why I suggest point 1 on RWASD to be set to X equaling 2293 instead of 2162, and Y equaling to 90. And for point 2 to be set to X equaling to 8192, and Y equaling to 709, to have the best dead zone set up on RWASD. I would like to caution that games like DayZ on console have a very poor joystick setup, so if you're a developer making a configuration for controller users to play with, to please be cautious not to randomly copy a game's joystick controls. Now on to our third part of this chapter. I have to talk about features all controller mappers ought to have, with the first one being the ability to sprint easily on joystick. Unless we are talking about Call of Duty on PC, many first-person shooter games on PC require the keyboard and mouse user to hold W and Shift to sprint. In almost all console games, however, the controller player is required to push their left joystick forward and click L3 only once to sprint. On a controller mapper, a joystick user is forced to push their left joystick forward and hold, instead of clicking once, the L3 joystick button down in order to sprint, which gets really uncomfortable/annoying to do every time you want to run. Which is why I asked Joy-Shock Mapper and Rawast developers primarily to add a feature to where I, a controller user, can tap L3 once to toggle Shift/sprint, and to have the toggle be disabled once I'm no longer holding down the left joystick forward, at full throttle, to stop sprinting. The second feature controller mappers should have is the ability to assign untoggle commands. Now in console games you can press circle once to crouch and press circle again to stand up. But you can also press X to stand up if your character is in the crouch stance. There is no feature in neither JSM nor Rawast to assign the X button as another button to untoggle your guy from no longer crouching, which is annoying. Be sure to also add 2 different types of untoggle commands, because something really annoying will happen if you don't. In the free-to-play game on PC, The Finals, if you're crouched but press the X button to stand up, your character will jump instead of stand up if you press X once, and that's also a very annoying thing to deal with, which is why there should be an option to assign the X button to just untoggle the crouch button, and another to untoggle and automatically execute the space/jump command if someone does want their character to instantly jump if they press X once. Third feature they should add is kind of tricky to explain. If I'm holding down L2 to aim, and press R1 I want my character to lean right, if the game supports leaning. If I perform a combo where I hold down L2 and press square on my controller, I want my character to lean left. Now you people may be asking why I'm asking for such a feature that already exists, and to respond to that, is because there's an issue I have with implementing this lean mechanic on Rawast and JSM still. Firstly, Joy-Shock Mapper has a noticeable delay, in a lot of my configs, to where there's a long delay if I perform the L2 plus square combo to lean left. Rawast doesn't have this issue. But the second issue I have with recreating this feature onto Rawast is my character leaning when I didn't want to lean. To explain in further detail, when I let go of the L2 trigger to stop aiming and press square to reload, my character decides to lean left instead of reload. And there's no easy option to just press L3 to sprint and get off of the toggle leaning command. So I have to waste precious seconds in pressing L2 again and pressing square to get my character to stop leaning left. Because some games don't let you sprint if you're holding down Q or E to lean still. I want there to exist a different type of combo command in both JSM and Rawast, to where L2 has to be held down before pressing square to lean. I don't want my character to accidentally lean left merely because I aimed first then pressed the reload button second. And with this chapter done, I want to say that there are a couple of complex features I want controller mappers to have. But I rather talk about it with the developers through private messages rather than extensively explain it through video format. Which is why we are moving on to the final chapter of this video. To conclude with the finale, I advise the audience to lastly watch these videos displayed on the screen now, to understand more about the potential and basics of gyro, and to pursue the complete development of Vita aim to drastically change the gaming landscape towards the benefit of the consumer and not the publisher.
I do want to mention skill-based matchmaking since I briefly brought it up. A lot of people are talking about it for good reason. It is harsh.
So to summarize, here's what's wrong with modern gaming. Matchmaking application 120 that has Coin Engine 122, which is basically skill-based matchmaking that is so strong that it may even ignore the latency variable when looking for a match.
They are able to shadow ban anybody based off of how many times you get reported.
They're going to be using an AI-based ToxMod voice chat moderation program to analyze voice chat in real time.
You're fucking dog. How the fuck did you even get on a streak, kid? You're fucking awful. You're negative. Who the fuck lets you on a streak? Like, what the fuck? offensive chat penalty. Look, this fucking bum reported me.
Branchoff Bush has been trying to get the attention of the mainstream Call of Duty community for a while, but it was clear we weren't ready to hear the information yet. This tweet shows him tagging a bunch of larger creators in the Call of Duty community, telling them that he helped a government agency expose the fact that Activision executes software that has unrestricted access to your computer's camera.
Analytics and Feedback Engine 124 that uses biometric factors like facial expressions, pulse, body language, and sweat to determine player satisfaction.
I had a match during the Modern Warfare 3 beta. I remember, right? I got like 76 kills or something. I had like 7 deaths, right? Dude, immediately after that match, I get into another one. Then they yank me out of it mid-match, and I was asked to verify my phone number. My phone number! Why? Why was that? Was it because I popped off? Did I just get profiled for doing good in the game?
Well, the score streaks / kill streaks in this game are an absolute joke.
Now, the next point that I'm about to bring up is arguably one that hits home the most for me, and I'm sure a lot of you as well, and that's the inability to play with your friends. Friends of various skill levels can no longer feasibly play together, or at least not have fun while doing so.
But because of this hidden ranking system, they're ruining the integrity of rank play, because you could have 2 players that are in the same rank, but both of them have a completely different experience getting to that rank. Yet both of them get to say, hey, I'm in Diamond, even though, in my opinion, one of them does not truly deserve that.
When I was talking about rose-colored glasses, like, oh, but the old CODs didn't have SBMM and they retained players great. It's like, first of all, I don't think anybody has the true retention data. Like, you don't know what the active player counts were on the old CODs. Like, I don't know that Activision even knows that. So if somebody has that data, like, I would love to see it.
Do these people just lie? Are they actual devs? Do they fake their resumes? How do you make this system? How do you work on Call of Duty and not remember when the player numbers were thrown in the players' faces front and center each time you logged on? To this day, you can go and see the player numbers on games like Black Ops 1, Call of Duty 4, Black Ops 2, World at War, you know, etc. Because they were proud of it back then, you know? Like, they did not try to hide it. Once Ghosts came out and more people were on Black Ops 2 than Ghosts, that's when they started hiding it. And they've hid it ever since because they're a bunch of pussies.
I'll even say that there's been several times where our friend group has not gotten to play COD and has not gotten to get on like the old days because, quite frankly, the lower skilled friends do not want to play with us higher skilled friends. And because of that, that's killed the social aspect of COD.
Black Ops 6, I have a better KD, I have better stats, better everything. Yeah, I've never been shadow banned on that. Probably because there's a thing, an algorithm, something going on in the background, something that needs to fucking go within Call of Duty. It's a joke. We have no fucking way to play this game if you're good. If you're good, you get punished. Whether it's SBMM or shadow ban, doesn't fucking matter. You get punished.
This is just a guess. This is just a guess. I could be completely wrong. Okay? I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that the new COD is gonna be riddled with glitches and cheaters when it launches, and it'll take them months to even fix one issue.
Is the Black Ops 6 campaign playable offline? Let's cut straight to the chase and say no. Unfortunately, you're not able to play the single-player campaign offline.
Black Ops 1, Chopper Gunner, VSAT Dogs. Black Ops 2, you had the Swarm, the K9 unit. You had like the Attack Chopper, the Overwatch. Bro, Black Ops 2 had some amazing streaks. Amazing. VSATs were fantastic. You could shoot the VSAT down back in the day.
2 different people that are in the same rank will still be playing 2 different types of matches. And I don't think it's so crazy of an idea for public matches that they want to do skill-based matchmaking. I don't like it. I don't think most people like it. But to implement something like that in ranked is very disingenuous. You know what I mean? To have like a secret hidden ranked matchmaking system and then like lie to everybody and give them a rank. Because it almost feels like certain people are getting like a fake rank. It almost makes the ranks like not mean as much. You know what I mean? And they should mean something. That's the whole point of a ranked playlist.
I mean, we've all played the older Call of Duties on controller for the most part, right? The aim assist was never this crazy. Never. But it's just another prime example of just catering to the noobs. It's like, not only are we going to give you relatively easy matches for the rest of your days, but here's some training wheels to help you with your aim so you can also feel good about that and continue to give us money.